Flood probably wins that record.
Right.
Oh, so, okay. So, couple of things. I'm trying to think if I should go into my student mode, if it'll even let me in. We'll see. Let's try this. So, most of you guys are going to predominantly use the ebook. Getting pretty soon, at this point, you probably have to make that choice, right? Most of you guys aren't choosing the expensive option at the bookstore, right? You're going to pay for the code through Connect for your book and all your assignments and stuff. And it's kind of nice, technology is nice, right? So when you click on that in our course, it should bring you, to our Connect. And it's asking me to log in. Oh, this is partly why it took me so long to post the PowerPoint. Because I had to reset this, so I couldn't remember it. So most of the time it remembers it for me. And I've changed my email, so I might have to go to the other one. Let's see. No, that's not it. I feel like I'm living in password hell. Yeah, exactly. All right. I'm going to go out of my student view because it's pretty simple, right? It's just hit this button. So for me, it looks a little bit different. And my computer remembers me, so I don't have to log in. I can just go. But once I get into Connect, I can put it in student view. Right? So you should come into the home page, right? When you guys click on it. Yes, no, maybe so. All right, okay. So right now we just have those 2 assignments, right? We're going to be building as we go. And then you can either click the library or you can click on the ebook itself. And everybody's going to have this, right? Is going to have the ebook no matter which method you chose, right? Yes. And then once you purchase your Connect, right, you could order the actual book, and I think Shay was the one that had done that, and I posted the exact pricing for you guys in an announcement. If you didn't see that, it's under the announcements in Canvas. So the reason why I'm showing you this is sometimes it's hard to navigate these things, right? And right now I'm navigating the ebook because I don't have a hard copy either. So that's a little bit the reason of the delay. So you can change between the chapters up here, the book contents, right? So hopefully we'll finish up chapter 1 today. And then you see that the reading, right? But sometimes you have interactives or videos or things like that, and you can click on something and you'll notice it'll actually take you to one of these tabs. Like if you click on the image, right, it'll take you to the image tab. If you were reading and you want to go back to reading, you just got to click back on the reading tab. Don't hit the back button in your browser. That's not going to work. And then too, like for the videos, which I think there was only, one for chapter 1. But then notice when you click on videos, it gives you like all the chapters. So these are really cool, and we're going to maybe start using these today. These are actually interactives, more than just videos. And I forgot to pre-warn you, but I think everybody has paper and something to write with, right? Nobody usually comes to a lecture class without paper and something to write with. Are you good? You got the computer. You'll do it on the computer. Okay. Because guess what? Eventually we're going to start writing out what? No? Tables. Oh, good old Punnett squares. So who doesn't know what a Punnett square is? Hallelujah. Because guess what? We're not going to spend a ton of time on them. But this you can move, right? And then you can do your Punnett square and you put in your answers here and you click submit and it'll tell you if you got it right or wrong. Or, 2, if you're struggling, you click the help button and it shows you the Punnett square. It's not much help, though. It just gives you the answer. Well, yeah, it gives you the answer. It gives you the answer. So that was why I went to the book, because I wanted to show you guys that. Okay. So so we'll use these and navigate. So remember I said you don't have to bring your book to class anyways. If I want to refer to something in the book, I'm going to pull it up on the screen because I have the ebook too. Or something related to Connect and whatnot. So chapter 1, we haven't finished up. So we were on slide 22, right? This one is where we ended, I believe. Am I correct? Yep, okay. So we're getting ready to start the next section. So for the next section, you need to be able to explain how the expression of genes leads to an organism's traits, define genetic variation, discuss the relationship between genes and traits. So these are some of the terms that we started talking about, right? Describe how genes are transmitted in sexually reproducing species, and outline the process of evolution. So a trait is any characteristic that an organism displays. So we ended last time I was talking about blood types, right? So one of our traits is what type of molecules are even expressed on the surface of our red blood cells that determine our blood type. So this doesn't have to be a trait like what you think of most of the time, like in biology class, blue eyes and wavy hair and things like that, right? It can be at the molecular level, right? At what molecules are being made from the DNA. We usually focus on morphological traits, right? So these are things that you can see, the hair, the eyes, the overall appearance of an organism. So in the case of flowers, that would be the color of the flower. There are also physiological traits. So physiology is function, right? So the ability, say, to metabolize a sugar. What do you need to be able to break down and metabolize a sugar? Enzymes, right? You need enzymes.
So what's the difference? Like, you know how they say they have good sugar and bad sugar, but which is the bad sugar?
Well, those terms are relative to begin with, right? Good and bad. Depends on what you're comparing it to. That's a really long discussion. I'm trying to figure out how to make it short. The important thing in life, especially as it relates to food and whether something is good or bad, anything in excess, including water, could kill you. So your key to life is everything in moderation and a variety of things. Don't eat just sugar. Eat all the things you need, proteins, fats, sugars. That's my skinny on that.
And why I ask that? Because, you're speaking on a person, say, that has diabetes, and they tell you, you have to change your diet, don't eat too much starch, but at the same time, your body needs starch.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you have to balance it. You have to find a way to balance. And that's the problem, the American diet is probably the worst diet in the world. So we can even identify behavioral traits, right? So this one is a little more complex. But this affects the way an organism responds to the environment. So the mating calls of birds, like how is it that they can make those noises that they make, those calls? Well, it has to do with how their body is built, right? And if they had some defect in some part of their body, they wouldn't make the same call. So this one's much more complex though, right? Because you're talking about multiple genes, multiple characteristics. But still, that ability is encoded in their DNA to have that particular behavior of doing mating calls. So, all our traits are controlled, at least in part, not completely, by our genes, by our DNA. Those distinct segments of our DNA.
Would a tendency toward like addiction or like depression be a behavioral trait?
Possibly. There's a lot of research out there that says, that has supported that, things like addiction have a genetic link. That you have some defect and you're trying to fill that void with the addiction.
In terms of the aggressor gene, that they say that given the right environmental factors, it's more contributed towards that. So
Yes.
it has the gene within the media reaction.
Right. So like she's saying, and that's why it says at least in part, right? Not completely, right? There are certain things that, and we're going to actually go over an example coming up. So I'm going to save it. Because PKU is coming up. Which will, I think, really help you understand that, you are very much governed by your genes, but the environment also has plays a role, right? And you might not necessarily suffer, right? Believe it or not, you could be a diabetic and, you could eat the right foods and not actually have to take insulin. There are people that it's hard. It's hard. It's hard in this society, in this country to do it, but it can be done. So that relationship between our genes and our traits spans 4 levels of biological organization. So those genes are expressed at a molecular level, right? So we're talking about DNA, RNA, proteins. So you have the DNA, and then from that, we make the proteins. That's at the cellular level. And then traits are what we talk about at the organismal level, right? So what trait does that organism have? Do they have A-type blood? Do they have B-type blood? Genes and traits within a particular species can also be studied at the population level. So you can look at, and there's been studies done, right, based on ethnicity. How many Caucasians typically have what blood types, right? So the largest, anyone know, percentage of blood type for whites? It's the most common blood type out of the ABO blood group. I think it's O. I think it's like 40-something% O. And then I think A comes in, then B, and then AB is the least abundant. Where it switches up in some of the other ethnicities, right? It's different for Asians. It's different for African Americans. So we're looking at that one trait, right? Blood type. But at the population level, talking about people, and then within distinct populations like Caucasian, African American, Asian. So a specific example, right? At the molecular level, we're talking about DNA being transcribed into messenger RNA, read by the ribosome to see the cellular product, which typically is proteins. So in this case, give rise to differences in pigmentation of the wing of the moth. So within each individual, right, you have ones that are dark colored and ones that are light colored. And then at the population level, right, we can look at how many of them are dark, how many are light. And of course, the ones in the forested regions tend to be more darkly colored because they better camouflage into that environment. where the lighter colored butterflies are in the unforested regions, where they fit into that particular environment. I didn't realize the little pop-ups were there. But so, genetic variation. So these are differences in inherited traits among individuals within a population. So like the ABO blood group, right? Within the population of humans, we have A blood type, B, AB, and O. For flowers, right? You have, for petunias, you can have white ones or you can have purple ones. It's all the same species, right? Just the color is different. Why? Because the DNA is different, and therefore the proteins were different. Anyone know what is the difference between something that's purple versus white usually, or something that's colored versus not colored? Somewhat. Do the white ones produce a protein? The ones that are white, do they produce a protein? They don't produce a color. Right? Blue eyes is actually no pigmentation, not producing a protein. Right? Again, not producing pigment. Being albino, you don't produce any pigment. So that gene that would normally produce a protein isn't. It's defective. It's not producing a protein that produces a color. Right? Most of the things that are the white is actually the absence of color. Does that make sense to you guys? That's important to know because we're going to talk about that a lot, about how you're not producing something. So in some cases, the variation is very striking, very different, right? Some species may even be misidentified as belonging to a totally different species because the different forms are so different that we don't recognize them as being different. And for some reason in this PowerPoint they did not give me this figure, right? So these are your morphs. So they're still the same species, right? But they're morphologically, when we look at them, they're quite different. So this is also why I have my book open, so I can flip over. And I think it's poison dart frogs, if my memory serves me correctly. So we'll go back to chapter 1. And I'm just going to click on the images for chapter 1. Yeah. It's the poison dart frogs. So they're both poison dart frogs. They're both the same species, right? But color-wise, they're definitely very different, right? But that's really all that's different about these two guys, is these different color patterns and colors. But that's because within a population, we can have these morphs, these differences. So this variation is a result of various types of changes to the DNA at the molecular level. So why is it one of them was yellow and the other one was blue? Well, that DNA code is different. One of them is going to produce blue and one yellow, right? I don't know why I have red on the brain. So these are referred to as gene mutations. So the DNA code, the sequence is different. Because it's different, the protein's different. And thus, the trait we see, the color, is different. Now the differences that we see within a population are referred to as alleles. So they're different forms of the same gene. So we're still talking about color, say. Or the example that I've been using, blood type, right? I don't have either A or B alleles. I'm O. Right? I still have some segment that would match up, but again, mine's non-functional. It doesn't produce a protein on the surface of the red blood cell. Not one that's recognized differently. Yeah. It's not truly universal because that's only one antigen group. There's lots of other antigens. Those are the major ones, right? ABO is the major problem. And then what else do we usually say for our blood type? Positive or minus, right? Or negative. And that's actually referring to another antigen. And in that antigen group, it's either you have it or you don't. Either you produce or you don't, right? It's known as RH or sometimes D because somebody thought, you know, they should just keep going with the letters, I guess. I don't know. I think that that's confusing. Let's stick to the RH, right? Sometimes you'll see D, though. But that's a totally different gene, right? And in that case, too, kind of like the purple and the white flowers, either you produce color, either you produce that protein on the surface of your red blood cells, or you don't. Make sense? So there's three different possible alleles for the ABO blood group, right? There's A, there's B, and there's 0. O. Right? Some of them just have 2, right? Like RH. You either have it or you don't. So changes in the chromosome structure itself. And the structure of DNA is really important on how it functions, right? How it stores the information, how that information is successfully accessed by the cell. So if large sections are lost, duplicated, reattached to another chromosome, that can create problems. Changes in the number of chromosomes. So I was talking with some of our colleagues yesterday. One of them is a new super adjunct that we have working for us right now, which means she teaches more classes than a normal adjunct because they have a hiring freeze going on right now. Thank you, Bobby Jendal. We can't hire her as full-time permanent. Hopefully we will at some point. She's a virologist. And so we were talking about viruses and proteins and that's Rebecca Sanchez. Her name just for 2 seconds went out of my head. And then James Gunther, Dr. James Gunther, who's the director for the Science and Laboratory Technology program, who's done a lot of studying and research in proteins. So we're having these really cool, nerdy scientific discussions about proteins. And about people doing, science in their garages like people used to build, computers and technology. And so you can buy kits over the internet and you can become a biohacker. And, we were talking about how, sci-fi movies that you see and the X-Men, that could really happen. And it's not that far-fetched in today's society for those possibilities to exist. So they're talking about how, you could basically create a whole nother human species by just adding another set of chromosomes. Just another chromosome.
Don't they have, I don't know if they've actually put it into practice, but is it possible to get DNA from, 3 different people? Because I read something where, they were trying to get that.
Well, they engineer babies now almost. I don't foresee us not getting to the point where you go in and you go, okay, I want my baby to be blonde-haired and blue-eyed and
Tall, short.
yeah, it's kind of frightening.
Yeah, my dad is a dermatologist and he's saying there's lots of studies now of burn patients to regenerate skin cells and
Well, they make organs now. They make skin now.
It's like, they don't need a graft anymore.
Yeah.
Just put something on it and it'll grow.
One baby foreskins can grow an acre of skin in the lab.
It's crazy. So yeah, I mean, and of course, you know, bad things could happen too. You know, I start thinking about those sci-fi movies where, you know, they've got these crazy mutated people and stuff. Does anybody know a particular disease that we do see now because the chromosome number is messed up? There's more chromosomes than there's supposed to be. Down syndrome. Trisomy 21. The 21st chromosome, they have 3 instead of just 2. So, single chromosomes may be lost or gained, right? And so I think the picture they have for this one too is for Downs. How do I get to the next one? Oh, just scroll down. Yeah. So that's an individual with Down syndrome. And they have particular characteristics because of that extra information. My husband's little brother's actually got Downs that I grew up with. And they don't tend to live as long as other people as well because of this defect. And then this is showing wheat. Most modern day wheat is actually 3 sets of chromosomes, not just 2. Tri-hybrid, I guess, would be the call for that. So 3 wild species with 2 sets of chromosomes each, producing actually 6 sets of chromosomes in those cells. It's a whole lot of DNA. Mm-hmm. No, there's most of the scientific evidence has led to the age of the woman. The problem is as we age, we don't do things quite as well as we did when we were younger. And when the egg is formed, instead of those 2 chromosomes coming apart like they're supposed to, they don't. And so you end up with 2 of the 21s in the egg. And then when the sperm comes along, now you have 3 of that particular chromosome. Why that chromosome, I don't know. But they haven't found any other genetic link other than making a mistake in the fact that as we age, we're more likely to make that mistake. So you usually see that, they say that the kind of threshold is about 35. Women from 35 years old on have a greater chance of having a child with Downs than a younger individual. Where they say spermers actually become better as they age. How does that happen? It's so not fair.
I thought they were saying now that autism was being linked to men's age.
I haven't read up on that one to know for sure. I mean, I'm sure, you know.
There are a few things.
Yeah. Can't all be good, right? Can't all be good.
If a couple were to use a surrogate, would it lessen the chances of...
No, a surrogate typically is someone who just houses the egg in the sperm. The egg and the sperm usually still come from the parents. A surrogate is because usually the mom isn't able to carry to term, and she probably has some type of uterine defect. May have had endometriosis or something like that.
If you freeze your eggs,
Yeah.
they don't act like it won't.
Yeah.
Does it cause that? Or does it stay?
I don't know that we have enough data to know for sure. If you froze your eggs, if that would be able to put them in a state of stasis, that they would be okay. Yeah. I mean, it's already formed the egg, right? So it's already gone through that process. So the thing with that is when you take it out of the body, you'd be able to look at it and see, oh, it has all the right chromosomes, we can use that one. So that's the other advantage of something like that. I mean, they've done stuff like that where, you know, parents have had a particular defect and they still want to have kids and they have money and they get the defect fixed at that level.
So why do you think that has went up over the last years? A lot of women freezing their eggs, you know, onto sperm banks and stuff like that.
Because again, you know, as we age, and for women, you get to a point where you have no more eggs. They're all gone. You have a set number you're born with. Once they're gone, they're gone. So as we age and once you reach menopause, you're not producing any eggs anymore. You're done. That's it. So as we delay later and later in life the decision to become parents, and that's one way of putting that off and not having the risk of something going wrong or, you know, running out. You do have a limited supply. Make sense? So the traits an individual express do not represent the genes alone, right? So we know this. This is the interaction between the genes and the environment. You know, so I mean, you could be a diabetic that doesn't produce insulin, and if you didn't eat the diet we eat, if you ate a diet that didn't have sugar problems and had sugar balance, then you'd never have a problem. It's when you're in the environment, like the culture we live in, that's full of sugar and everything, and even things you don't expect sugar, and you look at the label like, what's that doing in there, right? Or in my case, wheat isn't everything. No, I have an intolerance, a very awful intolerance to wheat.
My mom has celiac, and she went to the doctor, and the reason they found it out is because she was borderline diabetic, because her pancreas wasn't producing
Enough
insulin
insulin, yeah.
or whatever to digest the sugar.
Yeah,
in it.
yeah.
But then they fixed it.
Yep. Just don't eat that crap. The one rare opportunity that I go someplace like I went this morning, you know, some places I don't bother telling them not to include the bread. I you know, for me, if there's a tiny little speck, it's not going to hurt me. But like, I literally cannot eat as much as 2 bites of bread. I will have a horrible headache. My jaw will hurt so bad. It's not even funny. I don't even want to move my jaw. And I just give it away to someone else. Like at McDonald's, I'll get like the breakfast platter with the biscuit, and I just give the biscuit away. Usually there's always someone in there who will take my biscuit. Right? You know, every once in a while I'll be like, I can actually order, you know, and tell them I don't want the toast, and they really won't like argue with me about it. You know, I'm like, I don't want the toast. You can just keep it. It's just going to get thrown away. For those other people who want to eat it, you keep it. So an individual's diet has an effect on his or her height, weight, and even intelligence, right? You really are what you eat, right? And a lot of times it takes us a long time to figure that out. Like, I've been suffering for a very long time. It wasn't until the summer before last that we figured it out. My dentist figured it out, actually, that I was gluten intolerant. And stopping eating that stuff, I feel like Superwoman. It's awesome. I lived with a constant headache. It was horrible. It's horrible. I had a sleep apnea machine. I mean, I've been through it. Right? So, you know, make better food choices.
Question, now, does, like, with eating food and stuff like that, say you have 2 people, this person could eat all day and I gain 1 weight, and this person eats little to nothing and gain weight, so does the environment play a part in that too?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like, it's what you're eating. Are you exercising at all? Right? You know, and like me, if you were to know me 10 years ago, I was skinny as a rail, like 95 pounds. You could see my ribs. I didn't sleep at night because I couldn't breathe at night because what I was eating was stuffing me up too. It caused so much inflammation in my nose passages and inflammation in my jaw that I didn't sleep for, it's amazing I made it as long as I did and didn't die. Yeah, and I ate like crazy because I never really slept. So I was burning energy in my sleep. When I started gaining weight, I was like, oh, man, maybe I'll quit using my CPAP machine. Sleep deprivation, y'all, is totally not worth it. It's horrible. Like, I can totally understand why people use that as torture, because when I was, like, really bad off and hadn't slept, I'd probably do anything you asked me to in, like, 2 seconds flat. Because you are just, you're not you. You're not you. So, yeah, I mean, you are your DNA, but you are also so much affected by the environment, right? And hopefully I think that our society is changing. You know, we're trying to be more conscious about health and have a better understanding of how what we eat and what we do, how it affects our bodies. But yeah, there's a certain component of it that is genetic. I mean, there are people who genetically produce too much cholesterol. You know, I mean, they could cut every bit of cholesterol out of their diet and they're still going to have a cholesterol problem because your body makes it anyways, because it's a component of your cell membranes. The unfortunate thing is some people, their genetic is saying make way more than they need, you know, and then if you eat it on top of that, it's a nightmare, right? So the environment dictates whether a disease is manifested in an individual or not, right? So again, you could be a diabetic, and if you didn't eat the crap we have here, you wouldn't even know, right, that you were diabetic. It's when we start running into problems. So PKU is one of the examples, too, that's kind of diet-related. So for this one, you have an enzyme, right? It's encoded in your DNA, and it converts the amino acid phenylalanine. It's called phenylalanine hydroxylase. And it converts one amino acid into another, phenylalanine into tyrosine. Seems simple enough, right? Usually you have 1 or 2 functional copies that can do this. What happens if you don't get a single functional copy? Both your parents gave you defective copies. You can't make this enzyme. Yep. So if it's defective, right, you're not making this enzyme. You cannot do this process of metabolizing phenylalanine into tyrosine. Okay, so what? You can eat these amino acids, right? You can eat things that contain phenylalanine. You can eat things that contain tyrosine. The thing is, you need to maintain balance, right? Not too much of something. Literally, water. If you sat here and drank it and you never peed, you would die from water toxicity. There was some crazy woman trying to win, like, an Xbox or something on a radio show. Yeah. Kept drinking and didn't pee. That was the contest. Some idiot. Right? Anything in excess will kill you. So think about it. If you can't convert phenylalanine into tyrosine, what's going to happen if you keep eating it? You're going to accumulate it. And you're going to end up with too much phenylalanine. And that's going to create problems. And not good problems. It can cause mental impairment, for example. But again, this is relatively easy fix with diet. Just don't eat too much of it. So little babies, it's actually state mandated. must be tested for this before they leave the hospital. And you actually have to stay, I think, 2 days now because of this test. The baby at least has to stay 2 days in the hospital because this test can't be run like the first day. It has to be run like the second day or something like that. But they don't want to chance you not coming back for this test. Because then you're going to feed your baby something that's going to potentially cause them to have mental retardation. Because you don't know. So it occurs 1 in 8,000 births in Caucasians. They're put on a strict dietary regime, of course, right? Which is essentially phenylalanine free. And they'll develop fine. You just got to know this, right? So you don't have that problem. So Aaron mentioned aspartame. I think contains phenylalanine, which is what's the trademark name for that? Isn't that like Sweet and Low or something like that? It's a sweetener. It's like artificial sweetener. Yeah, just I don't know. I don't do anything artificial. I can avoid it. I haven't had a soda in like a while. It's rare. And then my husband, like, we don't buy it, we don't keep it in the house. It hasn't been so long, you go out to eat and he's like, oh, this is so gross. How do people drink this? You know, all the acid in it is not good for you. And then the sugar too, and again, the not sugars are not necessarily better, you know. I don't know whose brainiac idea was to market, you know, things as diet. Yeah. Not good. All right. So a lot of what we know about genetics is thanks to Gregor Mendel back in the mid-19th century. The foundation for, you know, genetics as we know it today. And he didn't have DNA sequencers, right? He had a plot of land at the monastery where he grew pea plants. But this man was meticulous, y'all. He wrote everything down. He calculated everything out. He was amazing. His skills of observation were off the chart. And he helped establish a lot of the principles of inheritance that we know today. Even though he didn't even see chromosomes, y'all. He figured out that there was something inside the cells. Right? Was determining what he saw. So some organisms sexually reproduce, and typically because of that are commonly referred to as diploid. Diploid means what? Two. We have 2 sets of chromosomes, right? Or 2 pairs of chromosomes. Where'd you get them from? Mom and dad. One from mom and one from dad. So we're lucky because basically you have a backup copy. So if one of your parents give you a defective copy, hopefully the other parent gave you a good copy of that gene, right? The other allele that actually works. Because if they don't, what happens? So if you get 2 defective copies of something, then it doesn't work. And you have some genetic disease. Inherited genetic disease. Exactly like with sickle cell. In the case of sickle cell, do you guys know what gene is messed up? What protein do you not make properly in sickle cell anemia? Hemoglobin. Your hemoglobin is different from other people. And because you make so many red blood cells, even if you get 1 defective copy, you do make sickle cells. You just don't make as many with someone who has full-blown sickle cell anemia where they got 2 defective copies of that protein. And because that protein is, I shouldn't say defective. It's not optimum, right? It's not an optimum protein. It aggregates differently in the cell, and that causes the deformity you see of the red blood cell, where it becomes sickle-shaped instead of that biconcaved shape that it has. And because of that, they kind of stack up on each other, and they clump up in small capillaries and such, and create problems in that sense. And they'll burst easily, as they're going through the small capillaries. They bang up and they just pop like a balloon. So you could be what we call heterozygous. Anyone know what that means? Hetero means different, right? So again, you have two parents, mom and dad. So did they give you the same thing? No, each one of them gave you something different. One of them gave you the sickle cell, right? That defective hemoglobin. The other one gave you the good stuff, right? The good hemoglobin. But you don't really see this, right, unless you were to test for it, because you produce enough, because like I said, you produce so many red blood cells that they just randomly pick one of the chromosomes or use both of them, and it depends on how much they use to determine whether that cell is going to end up being sickle cell of that DNA. Does that make sense to you guys? And we'll go over some of these examples later too. So in this case, because you make so much of this, you use both copies. In this case, that's kind of bad because you end up with some sickle cells, but you still end up with enough regular cells, you're fine. You don't even know, right, that you have a sickle cell gene. This is more predominant to be heterozygous in what country or continent in the world? Africa. Because being heterozygous makes you resistant against what disease? Malaria, right? So most people know this example, right? Because the protozoa, Plasmodium is a genus name of it. There's 4 different species that are transmitted by the bite of a mosquito. It gets injected into your bloodstream. And it goes into your liver and multiplies there, but it also multiplies in your red blood cells and goes through its life cycle to produce its gametes that would be picked up by a mosquito, reproduces in the mosquito, and then you get the other part of the life cycle, which I should know the name, and it's escaping me. Doesn't matter, right? It's a cycle. And so they reproduce inside the red blood cells, but because of that deformed shape of the sickle cells, it doesn't get into those cells. So usually it's not able to get in, so therefore it can't cause the disease. Make sense? So, but the problem is then when you go to mate, if you do the Punnett square, right, of 2 individuals who don't have malaria, right, which is great, so they're happy, right, they decide to mate, and then they have children, and all of a sudden, the kids have what? They have full-blown sickle cell anemia. Because those heterozygous parents, if you figure out the Punnett square, if they give their defective copies that they have to that one child has 2 defective copies. And has full-blown sickle cell. So 2 can be good, and 2 can be bad. Right? Mostly it's good, right? We have 2 copies. We basically, for the most part, have a spare copy. But sometimes you need both those copies to be good, and especially with sickle cell. So the 2 copies of the chromosome are said to be homologous, which means they have the same genes, not necessarily the same form of the gene, right? What do we call a form of a gene? Allele. All right, so you have the sickle cell allele or you have the regular hemoglobin allele. Which two do you have? Right? What were you given? What did your parents give you? So we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. So total 46 chromosomes. And pretty much size-wise and information-wise, 22 of them are pretty much the same, except for differencing in alleles, right? Same genetic information, except for, of course, the X and Y chromosomes, right? If you're a male, you have a different 23rd chromosome. You have the Y. If you're female, you have two similar X's. Who determines the sex of the baby? Men, right? Because they either give the X or the Y. So whoever crazy king that was killing off his wives should have killed himself. Henry VIII. It's the 8th? I always forget the number for him. Yeah. So it was all his fault. He didn't know it, though. Right? So gametes, for sexual reproduction to happen, we've got to divide this in half, right? Because if we give too much, it'll create a problem. So our sex cells, our sperm and eggs, are haploid. They have half the chromosome number, right? And as we said, it's important that these divide evenly, right? That you end up with 23 chromosomes in that sperm or egg. And unfortunately for women, this gets harder to do as we age. Set it up correctly, especially as it relates to the 21st chromosome. I think any other ones where there's an extra, it actually won't be a viable organism. It would die in utero. That's why we don't see it. And for some reason, I guess the information on the 21st is not too much of an overload, and that's why you still have a viable organism. You still end up having a child, but they do have the genetic defects known as Down syndrome. Turner syndrome? I don't know. I don't have all of them memorized. Downs is the most widely known. We can look it up, though. You can look it up and bring it to class. But I think for I'm pretty sure Downs might be the only multiple. But I could be wrong. That could be another one. So the union of the sperm and the egg restores that diploid number, right? So now we've got the two copies. This is beneficial to us because this creates genetic variation. Although for some of us that isn't always necessarily easy to see. I'm going to have to get some pictures from my mom. Because I kid you not, y'all. Look at that woman. My husband said he married me because he knew what I was going to look like when I'm old. I'm going to be beautiful still because she's still gorgeous, right? And yes, we look a lot alike. And my poor son, yeah, he cannot deny that he's mine. These aren't the best, this isn't the best picture, but there's a lot of similarities there. My mom has a black and white picture, and I'd show it to you guys, but you would know it's her because it's black and white, because I'm not that old. But when she was a kid, and one time when I saw the picture, I was like, oh, where did you get that picture of me? She's like, picture of you? What are you talking about? That's me. I was like,
That happens to me too. People are like, when did you have this old tiny photo taken?
Yeah.
That's my mom.
yeah, that's my mom. I mean, like, seriously, most of the pictures of my mom when she was younger looks exactly like me. Exactly. And then I'll show you guys next time. I'll bring in one of the pictures. I have 3 sisters. I'm the oldest, then my sister Terry, and then Christy. My sister Christy looks nothing like me and Terry. Dark hair, dark skin, nothing like us.
I actually knew a set of triplets. 2 of them looked like pretty similar, like blonde hair, blue eyes, and then the third one, dark hair,
Yep.
tan skin,
Yep.
brown eyes.
Yep. And so we actually got in trouble once because we convinced one of her friends she was adopted. We also tried to trade her for a dog. We were typical sisters. But yeah, I mean, yeah. She doesn't look anything like me, really. She looks, so you're going to get, sometimes, right, you're going to get quite the variation, right, within a family. Other times in families, like my best friend, her and her sisters, they all look the same. I mean, like the same. It's frightening how you're just like, oh yeah, y'all are related. For sure. But sometimes even within your own family, right, that mixing can really create a variant that's quite different from the other children in the family. So our makeup changes over time, right? And one of the things that we've seen more of, because it has a genetic link, is you hear more and more nowadays, especially if you have children, about peanut butter allergies or peanut allergies, right? And the reason for that is, think about this. Most of us, I mean, I don't know anybody who didn't eat, when they were a kid, peanut butter sandwich, right? Anybody not eat peanut butter when they were a kid, right? So we find out pretty early on in life that you might potentially have this allergy, right? And then you pretty much avoid it like the plague from being exposed to it again. And if you've studied immunology, unfortunately the immune system, each time you're exposed, it responds even more aggressively than the first time. So each exposure, right, is putting that person at greater risk of potential death. So before we really understood this kind of stuff, what happened to people? They ate these sandwiches, right? They ate peanut butter. Did they grow up to be adults? No, they what? They died. It's the reality of it. They died. They didn't grow up and have children. Nowadays we know about it. We prevent someone from dying from eating peanuts, right? So what happens? They grow up, they meet somebody, they have a baby. Guess what that baby has? Peanut allergy. We've perpetuated this defect because we've prevented death. Right?
So my question is, why is it when someone used to eat something, then later on down the line, like they just can't eat it at all, they're allergic to it?
The truth is, most people aren't necessarily allergic to it. They're a lot of times what's referred to as intolerant, like me. Like, I'm not allergic to gluten, right? But I definitely don't tolerate it well. Right? And at the molecular level, I don't know exactly why. I know definitely, and my dentist, gave me tons of pamphlets because it took him a long time to get me to quit eating grains, and I'm a scientist. And so he handed me a scientific paper and he said, read this. And so finally I was like, okay, fine. I'm tired of being in pain. I'm tired of my jaw hurting. I'm going to try this. I'm going to do it. On vacation of all times, which actually was easy because then they could eat the pizza and I was sitting there eating the salad, right? I could order a different meal. But now I just don't eat it because I already know that it hurts me. So grains are inflammatory, and more so for some people who have allergy like me.
My daughter was allergic to peanuts at 9 months old. Gave her a sandwich, blew it like glue.
Mm-hmm.
We avoided it like the plague. At 2, we went and saw an allergist again, and she had like none of the markers for allergens. So at 2.5, we did the challenge, and now she eats peanut butter. So like you can't. Your body does change, and you can, like for me, I was horrifically allergic to thistle. That reed. People eat it here too. Cajuns will tell you, right? They eat thistle. Huh? I don't know thistle. They eat it. Before it flowers, they go and they eat it like cucumbers. But I went out on a tour on an airboat, and the guy, cut it all up, and I was like, no, I'm going to pass on that because I'm allergic. But I went for desensitization shots,
where they purposely injected me with what I was allergic to. And I'm no longer allergic to thistle. So we got my body to switch to a different pathway, IgG versus IgE, where that's the antibody of allergy. So the other thing too is you may have avoided it, but she was still exposed to small amounts of it. And it may potentially have allowed her to make that shift. Some people don't make that shift, but she may have made that shift. So yes, you do change. There is the possibility it could get better or go away. And then there's some times where you're not truly allergic. You're just intolerant. You'd actually have to do testing to see if you're producing the IgE to actually see if you're truly an allergic reaction.
I had a friend, you probably seen her on the news and everything. She had been taking Tylenol her whole life.
Mhm.
And right before I seen her year in high school, she had an allergic reaction to it.
Mhm.
And then they sent her to Children's Hospital, and they were giving her, she was taking Motrin, and they thought she had chicken pox. So they just kept giving her more Motrin to fix it. Well, come to find out she was having an allergic reaction to Motrin. And she ended up having Stevens-Johnson syndrome, and it burned her skin from the inside out. Like she was in the burn unit for the whole summer, right across the year. She was on the news on Channel 4.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is we don't know everything. This isn't Star Trek where we can scan your body and know everything that's happening. Wouldn't that be awesome? But yeah, there's so many different possibilities, and sometimes we don't make the best choices. Even doctors. I mean, there's so many possibilities. They're actually making their best guess all the time.
So the adaptive immune response isn't something that's ubiquitous to everyone in terms of the...
How do you think your immune system knows how to function?
Pardon?
How do you think your immune system knows how to function?
When it's exposed to a certain...
No, at the core of it all. DNA. At the core of it all, your immune system knows how to function based on your DNA. So again, for me, I inherited those allergies I was talking about. I inherited them from my parents, my mom specifically. And guess what I did? I turned around and passed it on to my son. The two of us take our allergy medicine together in the morning before we leave the house.
So so my best friend developed an allergy to penicillin.
Mm-hmm.
And so she doesn't have kids yet, but if she gets pregnant, she can pass that.
Potentially, right? Because we mix these things up, right? And so she may or may not pass it on to her children. It's not a given, but again, if we have more and more people with these things and they don't die from it, then there is the potential of passing it on, and that's why the prevalence increases within our population. Make sense? It's all encoded in your DNA. So one of the professors who used to teach history here that I used to work out at the gym with, Max, I ran into him a couple weeks back, and him and his wife both have PhDs, really smart, really cool people. And he's like, more smart people need to have more babies. And again, because a little bit of your, good majority of your intelligence, but also, environment. What schools did you go to? What parents did you have? What upbringing did you have? Right? Those can be really big factors. I mean, you may have the potential to be brilliant, but don't use it. Right? Don't apply it. In my case, I'm dyslexic. I inherited that too. I'm not totally broken though. I have some good qualities, I promise. Even my dyslexia is a godsend sometimes. I see things differently than most people. So, but variation is why too. Think about it. If we were all inbred dogs, right? If we get to this super pick what your baby's going to look like, we're all going to be the same. And then when some virus comes along, it's going to wipe us all out, right? Because we're all going to be the same. Being the same is not good when it comes to genetics, y'all. It actually is a hindrance to you. There is a tribe in Africa, y'all, they're genetically, we can't make everybody this, we can't make a drug from this. Their DNA is different. They make a different CD4 marker on their helper T cells. They are naturally genetically resistant to current HIV virus. it can't grab onto their cells. It can't get in. They won the genetic lottery, y'all, against HIV.
Oh, that are they also making some subject to big pharma.
No, I don't think Big Pharma did that. They won the genetic lottery.
They might be targeting them now to see how they can.
Oh, well, yeah, they obviously, that's how we know about it. They studied it, and they're like, well, why are these people not getting HIV? Well, this is why. They're genetically different.
Are they being studied?
Oh, they've been studied, yeah.
How long ago was this discovered?
I'm bad with dates.
Like,
But you can
within the
find it.
last decade or-
No, 5-6 years.
Didn't they say that like if like all the corn can be like wiped out because it's all the same now, so they like have to put it in the seed bank?
Bananas and apples.
Thank you, GMO. Okay, so biological evolution is this constant mixing and changing, right? And this is why we're still here, because somebody's mix was good, right? And the environment didn't wipe us out. The problem is we screw with the environment all the time, don't we? Like we've just said, we've messed with organisms at the genetic level. We've made them all the same, as far as corn is concerned. So natural selection is a natural process, right? In which individuals that have greater reproductive success are going to predominate, right, within the population. Does natural selection work on the human population?
Yeah, it does.
Sometimes. Yeah. But again, for the most part, right, we've augmented our environment. We avoid things we're allergic to so that we don't die. So to a certain extent, we actually prevent natural selection on the human population. We prevent death from disease. Where normally, right, that would consider a subset of the population non-fit. They would die off. They wouldn't reproduce. Their genes would no longer be in the gene pool.
So that's like the peanut allergy people, right?
Yeah, it's exactly that. Right? Natural selection normally would have eliminated them. We've stopped that from happening.
So isn't that like the opposite of natural selection? Where we're like,
I don't know if there's an opposite word.
we'll like keep you around because like we can help
It's
you
definitely
do
not natural selection, though. I guess maybe we will probably eventually end up with a new term. All right, so members of a species compete for resources, right? The best ones, the best suited for the environment are going to win. They're going to grow up, have babies. Their genetic makeup is going to predominate the population. Random mutations like the group in Africa, you really win the genetic lottery sometimes, right? You no longer are going to get killed off by that disease. You can have neutral mutations where changes in the DNA aren't good or bad. They're not beneficial and they're not lethal. And therefore, of course, not related to survival. That's what we mean by neutral. It's not going to determine whether you live or die or live better. So this change takes time, right? Over several generations of time. We don't screw with it. So the example they give you here is the horse, right? Here he was down here. He's now much larger. He has fewer toes. They actually had more than just one hoof, right? Modified jaw, why? Why would the jaw change? It, depending on what they had to eat back then, was probably different than what they're eating now. So the ones whose jaw, right, that modification where it was best suited for the food that was available at that time, then that, you know, was the group that predominated, right? So over, you know, millions of years, right, they modified to be able to graze. So in genetics, we divide it into 3 major fields: transmission, molecular, and population genetics. We're obviously going to deal with transmission, molecular, and hopefully a little bit of population genetics. As I said, I'm still kind of tweaking the chapters that we're going to go over, but we're definitely doing number 2. I already posted it for you guys, right? We'll have some homework. Definitely bring paper and pen because we'll definitely be doing some Punnett squares next time. And do the introduction in the discussion board so we can get to know each other.